Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this session on grant writing. So today we're going to be looking at the steps and processes in proposal development, but we're going to be looking at the proposal development specifically for grants. So today is going to be a continuation of what we started in session 1. So again, I'm just going to switch off my camera and then we can continue. Okay, so I hope that you were there for the first session and that you will see the connections as we move on with this following session. So we spoke about the call for funding. We spoke about understanding the guidelines of what the funders want. We spoke about ensuring that you understand what the call is for and is about and what is funded and not funded before you can consider applying. So what's important then following that is the actual putting together of the grant proposal. And you'll remember one of the last things that I said in that session is the importance of ensuring that you prepare your documents timeously. So today we're going to be focusing on what is it that goes into the grant proposal. And again, as I said last time, you will see the similarities in terms of writing a proposal, your own research proposal, and also the grant writing proposal. There are some differences in terms of how one focuses when you're looking at writing a proposal for a grant, when you're writing for a proposal for someone to entrust you with the money that they have. Okay, so here it's just in a nutshell, some of the important aspects that goes into a proposal. The title of your proposal, the title of the project that you want to focus on, and then the summary of the work that you're going to be focusing on, the summary of the abstract, right? And we'll speak to this a little later on. The project description or narrative, where you then tell the story of what it is that you want to do, what you want to achieve. And another important aspect, which we will give specific attention to tomorrow, is the budget. The budget is a very central and critical part of applying for a grant. At the end of the day, you're applying for money, right? So it's important to say, how do you structure what this money is going to be used for? And sometimes it can be something that determines whether you're going to get the grant or not. So we're going to dedicate a session to that. The management plan, how you're going to manage the whole project, and then how you're going to disseminate what you're going to find at the end of the project. So your findings or your discoveries, how are you going to disseminate that? And also how are you going to evaluate the work that you would have done? So here it is again in a snapshot of the things that I've just mentioned right now. So your title, the proposal title is a label that you use. So even when it goes out for review, when it goes out to reviewers, that's the label that's going to be linked to your application, right? So that's your title. So you need to think very seriously about the title of your proposal. It should not be too long, so not a whole long sentence. It must be accurate and succinct. It must tell me as the reader what this project is about, right? And it again offers you the opportunity to make a first impression. Is it catchy? Is it really capturing of what the work is about? Creativity here also is allowed, but always not forgetting that at the core, it needs to speak to what your work is about, what it is that you want to achieve. And then project description or the narrative. And you'll see here the narrative takes a bulk of the space when it comes to writing the proposal. So if you're going to be writing a proposal, and often you'll be given some direction in terms of how long it needs to be. Sometimes they'll say not more than 2 pages, not more than 5 pages, not more than so many pages. And sometimes it's word count, sometimes it's characters. So depending on the structure of the grant that you're applying for, there's always a guideline in terms of how long the proposal should be. And then in the content of what the proposal should hold, the project description is very important. Take note that the research plan is between 6 to 10 pages, right, of the project description. And then the background and literature review is only 2 to 3 pages. And as we say here, the funding agency wants to know what you, as the researcher, are going to do with their money. So it's not about what literature says, what others have done. It's important to do that because you need to also be aware of what already exists, what others have already done, and also how your work is informed by what already exists. So literature is always important. It's important in your own studies as you're busy with your own studies, when you're writing for publication. It's equally important when you're applying for a grant. It gives the funder the idea, or it shows them that you are aware of what's out there and that you're in conversation with other researchers in this field, right? And then the introduction or significance and the objectives. What is it that you want to achieve? Why should they give you this money? It must be clear, a clear statement. And don't be vague. As we say, don't dance around issues. Be very specific. You don't have a lot of space to be going on and on and on. So straightforward language is very important. Remember here, you're not necessarily writing to your peers in research and academia. You're not writing for publication. So straightforward, plain language is very useful and very helpful, right? Sometimes what some funders do is they would include community people. And here I'm talking about maybe NGOs or people who are in the field related or linked to what they would like to give funding to. And they may invite various different people to contribute or to be reviewers. And you want to ensure that you don't write in such a way that people will not be able to understand what it is that you're trying to convey. You don't want to lose your readers. Okay, so the management, how are you going to manage the process? What's important here is the timeline. The funding is for 3 years, the funding is for 5 years. How are you going to account for all the time, right? How are you going to account for the first 6 months, the first 9 months? And sometimes some funders give money in tranches. So they will say, we'll give you 50% of the money at the beginning, and then following a satisfactory progress report, we will give you the rest of the money, or we will give you 25% and then another 25%. So it's important for you to plan very well and know that in the first 6 months, this is what we hope to achieve, or in the first year, this is what you hope to achieve. And you work towards ensuring that you achieve what you have promised, because that then gets used to determine whether the rest of the money gets released or not, whether the report, the progress report, is deemed as satisfactory or not. And then, of course, the evaluation, the assessment. How are you going to evaluate? How are we going to determine that something has come out of this work? For those of us in academia, in terms of what you promise and what you list, how you going to assess the work is that some of the work will be published in peer-reviewed journals, right? So it's acceptance for publication in peer-reviewed journal. It's something that's easy to be able to measure, to say, oh, okay, here's the output or the outcome that came out of this paper. So as part of your progress report, you can say that a paper has been submitted to a journal, a paper has been accepted by a journal, what other things have come out of the process thus far, right? An evaluation process may not be so readily apparent for educational activities or programmatic efforts. So maybe you're saying that as part of this work, you're going to develop a module, you're going to develop teaching tools that are going to be used by schools or by universities. But for you to be able to assess whether your module or the tools that you've developed are actually working, they're actually making a difference in the teaching process, a bit of time is required. So assessment may not be immediate, right? So it's also important that as you think about what your different outcomes are going to be, it's important to, at the same time, also think about evaluation and assessment. Will they be easy to assess? So what is it that you're promising? Okay. And then the dissemination of the work. How are you going to disseminate the work? Publication of books, maybe that comes from the work that you've produced, peer-reviewed journals, presenting the work at conferences, and other avenues also these days. In this AI world that we're living in, there are other easier, more accessible ways in which work can be shared and disseminated. Publishing a book can take about 2 years or so sometimes, depending on the processes and the reviewers. But if you are maybe going to put something on a website, it might be quicker, right? So looking at multiple ways to share your results, web pages, short courses that you can develop. So again, this is about sustainability, that with these short courses, then there'll be revenue that's generated, education initiatives, student researchers that will then get access to this work. I've already mentioned course modules. And of course, how the work relates back or speaks back to the community. So what is your topic? What is your research going to be about? What is this funding going to be used for? And how is that going to contribute towards society? So in your dissemination, you just don't want to disseminate by writing journal articles. You want to disseminate also by ensuring that you reach the community. So this then means when you think about the outputs that are going to come from the work, you also need to think about other creative ways or other easily accessible ways that you can use for outreach, that you can use for community education. We know often you can't use your journal article for that. So you need to think of other ways in which you can be able to communicate your results, right? And this is why we also speak about the importance of public science. Public science is very important. Are you able to communicate your research, your results with the general community? Otherwise, who are you doing this work for, right? And then budget, just briefly. Some reviewers, and I mentioned this the last time, some reviewers begin their review with the budget because they want to see your plan, right? Your plan is very much linked to your budget. If you're going to use money for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that has to be aligned with the activities that you're going to be doing as well. Budget can include a number of things depending on what you want to achieve. But also it can also include capacity building. So it may include, if you are in academia and you are a lecturer, you can pay for a replacement lecturer so that you can focus on this research. So when you budget, you say, okay, when it comes to appointing someone on contract at UNISA for 6 months or for a year, and you consult finance department or HR department, and you ask them, if someone is on contract, teaching contract for a year, what is the university's what is the university's pay progression or pay standard for people who are on contract? And then you use that as a guide to put together a budget for that faculty replacement. And then if you're going to get student assistants who are going to assist you maybe to collect data, and other parts of the research process also, what is the stipend or the salary that they're going to get? Again, at a university like UNISA, you can always check with HR so that you get an idea of what the scales are when it comes to payment. And if you're going to be disseminating the work, the intention is to disseminate the work at conferences, you get an idea of how much it costs to go to a conference. Are you thinking of a national, a regional, or an international conference? There again, that forms part of your budgeting. Okay, and then of course for the actual research itself, the research supplies, the field sampling sites that are needed, and then if you're going to be developing a course, the course development, what's involved there in terms of the material that's required. So all of these things will then form that table of budgeting, or the steps, the different steps of your budgeting would be linked to this. But obviously this has to be linked to the kind of research that you're going to be doing. So are you going to require field sampling sites, but you're not going to do research that requires you to be in the field, for example? And when you're talking about research supplies, what are you talking about? So all those things need to be very clear, because some reviewers, as I said, they look at that and then they look at the body of your proposal and they said, okay, so this person said they're going to do 1, 2, and 3, or they budgeted for 1, 2, and 3, but what they budgeted for is not coming across in the activities that they're saying they're going to do. Then it shows that you did not plan very well. Then it shows that your objectives are not aligned with how you're going to be doing the work. So if the budgeting is flawed, then the whole proposal is flawed. Okay. If there's no or very little money requested to support a particular activity that perhaps we know requires money for it to happen, this may indicate to reviewers that you, as the proposer, the researcher, have not done sufficient preparation to actually do this activity, right? So also what you budget. So don't say, oh, I'm just going to put 100,000. Don't thumbsuck the money. Make sure that you do your homework, that the numbers that you put down need to come from somewhere, not just something that you just, okay, it's a good number to think about. I'm going to get student assistance and I'm just going to give them 10,000 Rand each. No, you cannot do that. Okay, so you need to do your homework and proper planning when it comes to putting together a budget. Okay, and we'll look at those specifics in our upcoming session. So what separates a successful research grant proposal from a failing submission? So what is it that needs to be given attention and focus when you put together a grant proposal that will ensure or increase your chances of getting funding? Okay, if your proposal is conceptualized, the problem or the focus area is very clear, then I, as the reader, also then understand that, okay, you know what you're talking about because you've researched the problem, you've defined the problem clearly. I read it and I can see why it's important for us to give attention to this phenomenon, right? Accurate alignment with the identified between the identified problem and the reference of the proposal call. So what is it that the funder says they're going to give attention to or funding for? And how is that linked to what you are then proposing? So you cannot propose a project to a funder that is not interested in that particular topic. All right, so that would not be a good project. So if there's accurate alignment between what you've identified as a problem and the reference of the proposal call, great, right? Tick. Scientifically justified subject focus area. So you've justified why this is a problem, and you have supported the statements that you're making, the arguments that you're making. So there is justification for the need to do this work, right? If there's clear researchable, and aligned aim and objective. Your aims and objectives are clear, they are researchable, and we can see from an empirical or theoretical perspective how this is possible, then that you are on your way to a winning proposal, right? And also, we don't do research for the sake of doing research. Funders give money for research because they would like to also see work that contributes towards social imperative issues, issues that are topical, issues that are of relevance. And we know right now, much of the work that we do, if you think about your own research as well, within the context of UNISA, we speak about the niche areas, we speak about national imperatives within South Africa, but we also speak about globally the Sustainable Development Goals. So if you think about your own research right now, can you see an alignment with any of the 17 SDGs? Right? So when you're applying for a grant, you need to be able to show why this is an important issue to give attention to. What is the relevance of it? Is it going to assist us to get better understanding and meaning and come up with ways to respond to or deal with climate change, for example? Is it going to assist us to be able to respond to issues of gender-based violence? Is it going to assist us to be able to ensure that all the children get access to quality education? So what is it that your work is doing, right? So it's important to think about these alignments. Then we can say your proposal is good. Agenda 2063, if you are in the continent, the African Union rather, has put up also Agenda 2063 to say that as the continent, these are the issues that we need to give attention to, that by 2063, we need to have responded to all these issues that are plaguing the continent and the globe more broadly, right? And clearly rationalized, well-justified research plan. This is what you plan to do. In the first year, you want to achieve this. In the second year, you want to achieve this. You want to submit that. You want to make sure one of the students that you would have recruited will have submitted. So what is the research plan that you have? And then the golden thread, again, clear incremental from month 1 to month 36, if it's a 3-year research plan. It needs to be clear how from where you start, month 1 to month 36, there is a golden thread, right? Between the key project proposal aspects and showing exactly how from the beginning to your methodology, to your evaluation, to your dissemination, how everything flows logically from one to the next, right? And is this study feasible? Is this project feasible? Where are you situated? What is it that you would like to do? How do you want to do it? And based on what you've put down, what you said you want to do, is it feasible, right? And then, is it going to be applicable in practice? Or are you going to be contributing to theory, our thinking around a particular issue, phenomena? Or is it going to contribute towards skills development, maybe capacity extension? You're going to ensure that as a result of your work, students will gain research expertise. You're going to be working with students. You're going to be supporting, funding students who will then gain qualifications at the end. So how clear is it that there's going to be this skills or capacity development or extension? So you're going to be contributing towards the pool of PhD graduates in the country. So these are something that you want to articulate when you're writing and applying for a grant. And of course, the budget that I've already spoken to, and also how everything fits together. And then the opposite of what we've just said, and it's also important to also know what not to do or what to give attention to. So just based on what you've just said, the opposite. So if your focus is not clear, right? So there's a loose problem focus based exclusively on anecdotal rather than broad-based empirical evidence. Again, here, you did not research this problem. You did not engage and read and find out what is it that is there around this particular issue or phenomenon that you want to do your research on. So you're just looking at anecdotal things. Hey, people are saying this, people are saying that. But what is the basis of these things that people are saying, right? The example that I can give is the recent one was around COVID. There's still a lot of conspiracy theories in either direction that one wants to have a look at. And, people having their own issues, believing in or not believing in vaccines, for example, and some people being scared because of what they've seen on social media, what they've heard other people say. So those are some of the things around anecdotal issues. And you can start with that, that there's a anecdotal evidence shows us that there seems to be a fear and hesitancy among people when it comes to issues of vaccination. This is something that's new for people. This is something that just came out of and people are unsure of what to believe, right? Based on this, there's some scholars who've given attention to this. So-and-so says this, so-and-so says that. And so I'm joining this conversation, or I'm joining this work around maybe COVID and vaccine hesitancy to try and look at 1, 2, 3, right? I can think of an idea right now, but to give attention to this, to say if we do more work around this, it might contribute to the ways in which people perceive vaccines, understand vaccines, but also understanding the historical implications or historical narratives that people have around how medicalization or vaccination was used, again, as part of the colonial project, and draw on evidence, scientific evidence to that regard, and then saying, as we find ourselves here and now, it's important for us to pay close attention to this, so that should there be, God forbid, another world challenge like COVID-19, that we know how to respond to it, right? We can never really anticipate that you can try and put processes in place so that should there be anything like that hits the world by storm, what is it that we are doing to be able to better prepare as much as possible, understanding that you can never truly prepare for something that you don't really know, but you can prepare as far as you can. And that's why we do research, to try and answer questions, to try and anticipate things, and to try and look at probabilities of things as they happen. So that's important, right? So you don't just leave it at the anecdotal level, because then that will make your application weak, okay? And the application will not succeed, as I've indicated, if there's no alignment between the problem that you are identifying with what the funder is interested in. And then your aims and objectives. Just as in your own research for your honors, master's, or PhD, your aims and objectives are very important, because they're going to assist you in how you're going to get your methodology and do the work that is that's going to assist you to be able to solve the problem, to be able to answer your research question. So if your objectives, right, and aims are non-researchable, then obviously that's a problem. And why are you doing this research? Are you doing this research because you want to contribute towards the realization of the SDGs, Agenda 2063? You're just doing this for personal interest. It's just for you, it's just for curiosity. And often, and there's nothing wrong with doing research because you're curious about something, because it offers you better understanding. But where are you doing that? And how are you doing that? And really, should someone give you 10 million rand for you to quench your curiosity thirst? Is something to think about, right? If someone is going to give you money, the funder is going to give you money, they would like for you to focus on an issue that is topical and of relevance and that can make the world a better place. Okay. And then wasteful research plan, like I said, you just decide this is how much I'm going to spend for this one. This is how much I'm going to spend for this one. This is what. So unfounded numbers that just lead to a research plan that can be wasteful. And I think that's why sometimes some researchers are unwilling to just give you all the money at a go, because they want to check first the progress of the work that you're doing and how you're doing it. And then based on that, they can make an informed decision. Because it's one thing to just entrust you with 10 million just based on a proposal, and it's another to give you maybe 3 million and say this 7 will give you after 6 months, after you've done a bit of work, initial work, so that we can get a sense of what it is that you are intending to do. Okay. So if there's no golden thread, again, between all the various proposal aspects, from your narrative, the description, the background of the problem, your objectives, and how that leads to your research methodology, the process that you're going to be using to conduct your research, how you're going to disseminate the work, how you're going to evaluate the work. If there's no golden thread between all these different aspects of your work, then it means your work was not well thought out, right? And you will know, even when you submit your own research proposal, the higher degrees committee will come back with feedback, and sometimes that can be the feedback, right? There's no evidence of feasibility consideration, so you didn't do your homework first. It's not clear how this is going to contribute either to practice or to theory or to capacity building. And of course, the budget, again, if it's poor, then definitely no funding for you. What are some of the common mistakes? Problems with significance, right? The work is not significant, no exciting, no new research. So you come up with a topic. Think of the initial conversations that you had with your supervisor at the beginning, and saying, I would like you to be my supervisor, and this is the topic that I'm thinking about. Or think about the outline that you submitted when you first registered at UNISA for your research, and perhaps where you are right now in terms of your proposal development or the different chapters that you're working on, how that work has developed over time. And you have that opportunity when you're doing this for your qualification. You do not have that opportunity when you are applying for a grant. The funder does not have time for you to learn along the way, to build on the work and to try and figure things out as you go along, guided by your supervisor. No, when you are applying for a grant, you need to already be clear. It has to be clear why this study is important, why it's necessary, why it's significant. Again, going back to the previous page, why it's imperative and relevant. So you need to show that. So some common mistakes is that when other applicants are applying for grants, it's not very clear what it is that their work aims to achieve. There's nothing new. There is nothing linked to the national social imperatives, right? So the significance of the work is very important. And if you are applying for a grant, you are led and guided also by the call that the funder has put out. So already there, you need to work and weave that in to show the significance of what you are proposing. The rationale is not compelling. You know, I hear what you're saying about why this work needs to be done, but it's not compelling. I'm not convinced as a reader, as a reviewer, that this is worth the 10 million that you're asking us to give you, right? So you really need to apply yourself and apply your mind and do your homework. And the impact of the work, it's not clear what the impact of this work is. It's not clear how you see this work making a difference. So it's really, think of it, for those of you who are like in economics and management sciences, you would know about the importance of the product that one sells, the importance of marketing. So think of yourself or as of the project, the topic that you're suggesting as something that you're going to go out there and market so that it's appealing to the one who hears it, who reads it, that they're saying, oh, I'm interested to see where this is going to end up. I'm interested to see what's going to come out of this project. It really sounds exciting. And so I would be interested to see what they're going to find after conducting the research. What we're going to read from them after 3 years. You need to do work that's going to make someone to say something like that, right? Do not overpromise. Do not have aims that are too ambitious, that require too much work also. You don't want to under-promise, but you also don't want to overpromise. I know of someone who applied for funding, and sometimes the funders will give you the funding, but then you need to understand that what you promise, you have to deliver. When they say you can produce a book and 2 articles, or what they expect from you is 2 articles, and then you say, yep, I'll give you 2 articles, I'll also produce a book, and I'll even develop a course material. So that's what you've put down, that's what you've promised, right? So it's either they may say, depending on what the reviewers think, and they read your work and like, okay, interesting that you're promising all these things and it's within the budget. All right, let's see what happens. Except now you have promised all of these things when you didn't have to. And so because you have promised, you have to deliver. So you cannot then at the end say, but I produced 2 articles. Yes, I know the book is not done and I didn't do the course development, but I did the minimum requirement, which was at least 2 articles. So I should be okay. No, you're not going to be okay. You need to deliver based on what you have promised in your proposal, because it is with the proposal that the funding was given. So do not be too ambitious when you apply for grants. Do not create too much work for yourself when it's not necessary. So try to find a balance, right? It's great if you can produce the 2 articles and a book and course material. That's amazing. The funder will be very excited, and it will also be good for you and your portfolio as well. Sometimes you can actually provide deliverables that are beyond expectation. That's great. That's wonderful. But do check what is it that you're capable of doing against what is it that's required, and then look at your research plan and then plan accordingly and promise accordingly. If your aims are not clear, as you know, even in your research, if your aims are not clear, we always say this is going to affect how you're then going to do the research, because at the end of the day, you conduct this research, whether it's a quantitative or qualitative study, to be able to answer or to achieve the aims that you have set out for yourself. So if there's no focus in the aims that you've set out for yourself, then that's also going to affect the research that you're going to be doing. And at the end, it's not going to be clear whether you've reached your aims or not, because your aims were not as clear as they should be. Okay. And limited aims or future directions. And again, here it's thinking forward to say, based on this work, what is it that we can then envisage beyond the work that you're doing? So what are the lessons learned, and how can we think about the possibilities of taking this work forward? Okay. Inappropriate level of experimental detail, those who are doing experimental work, experimental research. If there's no detail in terms of the processes of how you're conducting your experiments, how you're going to be conducting your experiments, what's required, then that can also be a challenge, right? The feasibility of each aim is not shown, little or no expertise with approach. So you want to run experiments, but maybe you don't have experience in that. In your mind, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to collaborate and I'll work with colleagues who've got expertise in that area that I'm not. This has to come very clearly, and it has to be articulated very well in terms of how you put together your research plan. We always say, even if maybe your understanding of quantitative work or methodology is limited, using a consultant is not sufficient. You still need to be able to read your data, understand your data, be able to interpret the data. So the expertise with the approach that you're using is also very critical, right? Lack of appropriate controls. So when you are doing work in the lab, for example, how are you going to be ensuring and planning for the experiments, but also the controls? If there is lack of appropriate steps put in place, then that also makes your proposal weak, okay? If you're not directly testing the hypothesis, or it's not clear how you're going to test your hypothesis, you're not discussing alternative models or hypotheses, you're not discussing potential pitfalls. So as much as you're talking about what it is that you're going to be doing, you also need to account for potential challenges that might come along the way and how you would mitigate those, right? And then, of course, your interpretation and analysis of data is also very critical. So even when you're applying for funding, all these different research process steps that we use in our own research for publication or for qualification are also applicable here as well, right? You as the researcher, challenges around how you are putting yourself forward, no demonstration of expertise or publications and approaches. Many funders, especially if you're going to be the PI, right, the principal investigator, and this is why sometimes when you apply for funding as a student, there's always a requirement that you collaborate with someone, either your supervisor or a senior colleague. Because they also want to check that if they're going to entrust you with 10 million, you need to be someone who has some expertise in the work that you want to do. So that's why they would ask for your CV as well, and you would indicate that you already have 5 or 10 publications in this area, so you're building on this body of work alongside your peers who are also doing maybe similar work as well. You need to demonstrate and to show this in the proposal. You're asking for a lot of money, but if we look at your track record in the past 2 or 3 years, you have not produced anything. And like I said earlier, here you are saying you're going to produce 2 articles, you're going to produce a book in addition to that, and you're going to produce 3 PhD students that are going to graduate as part of this project, and you're going to do course material. But then we look at your CV, and then the CV says, this person has not published anything in the past 3 years. But here you are saying, during the period of this funding, I'm promising all of these things. So your track record is not aligned to what you're promising. Is it impossible? Maybe not. Maybe you might. But when someone is going to entrust you with so much money, they also want to see what they're investing in as well. And they want to weigh the risks as well when they give you money. Do you have institutional support? This is something that continues to be a challenge, unfortunately, in the continent, in many of the institutions, because of the challenges with institutional support, especially when it comes to infrastructure and resources that are made available or should be made available by our institutions. Sometimes the internal processes can also be very tricky. So while you might receive the funding, the challenges might be as a result of the lack of institutional support, and not necessarily the fact that you cannot do the work or unable to do the work. So some funders also want surety that there is institutional support. And unfortunately, what this has done and continues to do over the years is that it ends up being this imbalance relationship when it comes especially to research collaborations, where colleagues would then collaborate with other colleagues who are from institutions that are highly resourced. And if the colleague who is at the highly resourced institution agrees to work with you, then the funder will then see that other institution as a safer space for the money to be given to the institution. And that can also mean, therefore, that the other colleague becomes the PI. And in the long run, this can work negatively for your progression as an academic, as a researcher, but also for the progression of your institution, especially when it comes to issues of ranking and things like that. Because receiving funding from external donors contributes towards the prestige and status of the institution. So all of these things are interconnected, right? And then again, when you're applying for funding, it's important to think seriously about who you would like to collaborate with and what the collaborators' roles are. Like I've just made the examples right now that sometimes you might be the one with the idea, but because of the lack of resources or infrastructure or institutional support, maybe at your institution, you don't have appropriate labs to run the kind of experiments that you need to for the work that you're proposing. And my institution has got state-of-the-art lab, and so the project ends up being housed or hosted at my institution instead. So these are some of the conversations that you would need to have with your research collaborators when you apply for funding and you've got team members and you've got collaborators, having to decide who's going to be the leader and who are going to be the team members. Okay, and when you're applying for funding, if you do have collaborators, obviously you need their support as well. You cannot and you should not put people's names in an application without their consent. And that's why other funders are very specific in that they need the collaborators' signatures, or they need confirmation in writing from collaborators that they are part of this application. Because otherwise, some people are very brave. They will just put other people's names and then hope that, no, when I get the money, I'll just invite that person or I'll invite them after the fact. Don't do that. Okay, so all of these things, right, are very critical when you are planning to applying for a grant. And there are some ground rules when it comes to thinking about putting together a grant proposal, right? We have different philosophies and paradigms that we follow when it comes to research, but there are some universal characteristics when it comes to doing scientific work, when it comes to doing academic work. Our approaches might be different, but there are core philosophical issues or universal characteristics that we always need to take into consideration. When you conduct research, the methodology is very important. Conducting literature is very important. Otherwise, what is the basis of the arguments that you're making? You end up asking questions that have already been asked. You end up doing research that someone else has already done. So the universal characteristics are that research is systematic, right? It's work that is rigorous, and it's about a disciplined search for the truth. Whatever you understand the truth to be, or truths in plural, to be in terms of how we understand the world, we come into the world, we make meaning of the world, we think about answering big questions in the world, we think about bringing about change in the world. What does ending poverty mean, right, for the world? What does doing research that grapples with the idea of reducing poverty levels in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years, in the next 20 years. What does that mean? It requires you to do systematic work that is informed by understanding history, by understanding literature that exists, by understanding the different policies and strategies and processes that are already in place. What have been some of the ways and things that have been put in place to try and eradicate poverty? So how is your work going to be different? How is your approach going to be different? And that requires rigorous work for you to be able to do this, right? So this is the ground rule when it comes to conducting scientific work. And this needs to come across very clearly in your application for funding, right? Systematic is not synonymous with pre-planned, right? You can pre-plan, but it's about the decisions that you're making, right? Careful consideration about the rational decision-making and weighing the choices in terms of the approaches and the ways in which you're going to do the work. So you can plan your work, do everything in advance, but if your work is not clear in terms of how you came to the questions that you're asking, how you came to choosing the kinds of methods that you are proposing for this research, then your work is not systematic, okay? So it's about really thinking, it's about questioning, it's about thinking, and it's about decisions that are well thought out. Because when you think thoroughly about something, it also contributes to how you're going to make decisions around the issues that you're thinking about. Okay. All right. And then parsimony, right? Arthur Schopenhauer says, just as the largest library, just based on what I just said, just as the largest library, badly arranged, is not so useful as a very moderate one that is well arranged. So you can have a library with 1,000 books or with 50,000 books and brag about how many books that you have. And I have my small library with 50 books. And I'm happy with the books that I've read. They're arranged very well. I know what they're about, and they've been classified accordingly. It's easy for people to get what they want, right? You can have a lot of information. You can have the greatest amount of knowledge, but if not elaborated by our own thoughts, and this is why sometimes social media can be so dangerous, right? You can be on all these different platforms. You can just type anything on Google, you will get the answer. Type anything, you will get the answer. We've got ChatGPT now. Type, ask it, you know, you will get information that you need. But if you don't apply your mind in what you feed the computer or Google or ChatGPT, then what you get out is not a representative or is not representing who you are and your beliefs, right? You can put it across as if it is, but if it's not elaborated by your own thoughts, then, you know, it's worth much less than a far smaller volume, like I said, 50 books against 50,000 books, that has been abundantly and repeatedly thought over, right? So I hope that makes sense. Planning is very important. How you make your decision in terms of the planning that you do, the processes that you follow, the methodologies that you choose, the steps that you take in the work that you're doing, all of those very, very critical. And even for your own work, just think about how this could make life easy for examiners when they engage with your work, right? Okay, so when you're thinking about, again, proposal development, articulating the project that you want to put forward to the funder so that they give you money, you need to ask yourself a number of questions and think about how those questions lead you to the kind of steps that you need to take and the elements that are therefore involved or included in this work. What is the problem? Is it really a problem? Why should it be studied? Right? And for you to be able to answer that question, it's about selection and statement of the problem. How is it articulated? If you can answer what is the problem well and why it should be studied, then your statement of the problem becomes very clear to the reader, right? Because you've identified the problem, it's clear what the problem is and why you're prioritizing this particular problem in a way that you have, like articulation of it, and then justifying why it should be studied. The literature was already there. So I'm identifying this problem. I'm saying there's a reluctancy of people taking vaccine, right? Is there any literature? Have other people asked this question? Is it the same in other countries? Have other people maybe done work? What sources are there? Review the sources, draw from those sources, and then identify the gaps, right? And when you've done that, then you see, is there a need or not for this work? Why it's important to do this work? You're building on this literature. You're offering a different lens here, right? And what is the likely outcome or achievement of the research, right? We will get a better understanding. We will be able to know how to deal with such challenges in future if we put frameworks or policies in place or some steps, a model of what those who work in this field can draw from or can use, right? And then you formulate your aim and your objectives, right? That you want to do this because you want to come up with this framework, you want to influence policy, you want to ensure that people understand how vaccines work, right? So what is your aim? What is it that you want to achieve? Why do you care that people take vaccines or they don't, right? So then you come up with a hypothesis that if people have more understanding of what vaccines are, what they do, what they contribute and how they can help us, then they will take them more than they have now. So if people are skeptical and they don't understand what vaccines are about, they will not take them. So you have this hypothesis. And then you say, okay, how do I go about proving this hypothesis, right? You're saying these are the aims and objectives. How do I answer this question? I answer this question by following a particular methodology. I answer this question by carrying out the research, collecting the data, running experiments. And where am I going to get this data? So the method that you're going to use, are you going to go to people, give a survey, interview people, try to understand, right? And what are the variables that you're going to be looking into that are going to assist you with this? How are you going to collect your data, the sampling techniques, the data processing plan, and then how are you going to interpret that data? Right? I'm sure as I'm speaking right now, you can see this is very familiar. At least it should be very familiar to you as you're working on your own research as well. Who will conduct the data? And here you're talking about the work plan. So as you're applying for the grant, when you're thinking about who will collect the data, then you say you as the PI are going to collect the data, or you and 3 research assistants are going to collect the data. So this also then forms part of your work plan. Your plan is an integral part of the actual research process itself. So who are you going to need? What are the steps? So personnel. So I need to know that, okay, I'm going to need 1. Am I going to do this in all the 9 provinces of South Africa or just 2 provinces? Will I get research assistants that will need to travel to those places, or will I seek assistants that are based in those provinces? Is there training that's required? So the timetable, how long is this going to take? You see how all of these are connected, right? And how will you monitor all of this? If you're going to get people who are based in those provinces and you're not traveling there all the time, how is the monitoring going to happen? You need to speak to that as well, right? So the research administration plan, and then identification of potential users as well. Are you thinking about the Department of Health at the end? If you've answered these questions around issues of vaccine, who is it going to be relevant for? Who are the possible users? Who are the target for this work? People who can benefit from this work. And what resources are you going to need? If you're going to have research assistants in all the provinces, how are you then going to budget for that? What's going to be required, right? And are you only going to be relying on the funder, or are you going to also look at other sources of funding? And if that's the case, you also need to mention that as well. Some funders actually prefer, some actually demand that you have another funding alongside their funding. Or if you've already identified funding, then they can supplement the funding that you have, or they can say that we're giving this much. If you're part of an institution, your institution should provide 40% of the funding. So we would like to see your budget. And if your budget is 3 million or 5 million or 10 million, we will give 60% of that if your institution also contributes, right? Or they want to know whether you've applied for another funding. And then the practical things, right? So who's going to submit the grant application? How is it going to be submitted? Where is it going to be submitted? Again, the call should be able to assist you with all this information. If it's an internal, a call that you received by email through the institution, you can even ask the institutional research office where most of our calls come from to get more information, right? And then knowing who is going to submit, how the submission is going to happen, and where it's going to be, also assist you in terms of preparing your proposal. Some funders require that you present your proposal. I saw one call recently where they want you to submit a expression of interest. So a 1-page expression of interest saying that you would like to apply for this funding, and this is why. You think you your work is aligned to what the funding is calling for. And then only after then will you be invited to work on the full proposal and submit it. And even with that, they indicate that those that they have shortlisted, they will invite for an interview. So you will be invited, and you have to stand before a panel and present your case. So these are also things to think about, to start considering when you want to apply for a grant going forward. It's one of the local funders, big funding, lot of money. But they invite you. They're based in Johannesburg, and they invite you to come for the interview in Johannesburg in person. Not even the Zoom or the Teams, but in person. So you as the researcher, your collaborators, preparing the proposal and how this would be presented, things that you need to think about. So the presentation of the proposal, you need to think about it broadly as the presentation, as I said, possibly in person, which is very, very rare. But the presentation also in terms of the actual application and how you present your case in the application itself. And that's quite tricky, because you're not there to answer questions that they might have, to clarify things that they might misunderstand. So you need to make sure when you write your proposal, you write it to answer questions that might be asked before they're even asked, right? So don't write something that might lead to people asking questions that cannot be answered, because you won't be there to answer those questions. And that would mean they have to make a decision based on what's in front of them. Okay, so that's very, very important. I'm looking at the time. I want us to have time for Q&A. The next sections that I'm going to be looking at, I'm really just going to go through them very quickly, because they're really a replica, if you will, of the previous sessions that we did on writing for publication, but also on the different aspects of your research, from introduction to literature review to your methodology. So the content of all of those, but in this case, of course, we're looking at them from the lens of applying for a grant. But the core, the body of the proposal is very much aligned to your research proposal that you are familiar with, right? So a proposal is intended to convince others, those who are reading the work, that you have a worthwhile research project. And that's what you do to be able to do your master's, your PhD, but it's also what you do to get a funder to be willing to give you money to do the research. Okay, so your work plan is very important. As I've indicated, it must contain all the key elements involved in the research process. That's very important, and you will see what I'm talking about right now. However, regardless of your research area and the methodology that you choose, all research proposal must address the following questions. And whatever college or faculty you're from, discipline that you're from, it's important for me to read your work and see what it is that you plan to accomplish, right? So what is it that you want to achieve with this work? After conducting this research, what are you hoping for? Why is it important to do this work? So for all of us, that's fundamental. Why you want to do it? So why should resources be put in place for you to do this? And how are you going to do it? Okay, so the method as well, in terms of how you're going to do it, is also very important. So writing a research grant proposal, it must be empirically supported. Convince me as your reader that your work is important, that it needs to be given attention, it's worthy of doing, and you understand what others have already done, so you're not reinventing the wheel. And what are the big debates around these issues, if there are any, and the methodology that you're going to use is sound, well thought out. Title should be concise and descriptive. I should read your title and get it, right? The abstract, we know, we've had a session on the abstract. It should include all the different aspects of your research, okay? You're writing a proposal because you want the reader to get a glimpse of what it is that you want to do and how you intend doing it and what it is that you hope to achieve by doing it. Okay, introduction. Here, you're providing the background, the context. You're framing the problem here at the introduction. This is how you introduce the reader to the issue at hand. Right? And again, here you need to show that you understand what came before you, what came before, what conversations came before yours, briefly in the introduction. So the historical backdrop of understanding this phenomena. We're talking about COVID-19 and a lot of work and talk and digging going back into history, where we now got to understand something that was not in our immediate level of consciousness, right? The 1918 Spanish influenza. That as a result of COVID now became part of our conversations today. So the historical backdrop that can contribute towards assisting us to make sense of what we are confronted with today. That's what the introduction is there for. Is it something new? Is it something that's never happened before? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's manifesting differently. What's going on? How was the other one responded to? What happened there? Can we learn from history, right? So that's very important. And here you offer key publications, because remember, you're still going to do a bit of expanding on the literature where you engage and in conversation with the literature. And here are some points to consider for your introduction. And I think this is also useful for your own work as well, that even if you're busy now with chapter 3, 4, 5, remember we always say you always go back to your chapter 1, to your introduction. So stating the research problem, right? The purpose of your study, providing the context is very important. The rationale, why this is so important. What are the issues and sub-issues that you intend to focus on? And those doing quant work, what are the variables that you want to give attention to, right? Or the phenomenon that you want to investigate or to understand for those who are in qual. Do you have a hypothesis that you state that you then go on to prove, right? And how are you limiting what you're doing? How far are you going? So the delimitation or the boundaries of your proposed work. You're going to focus only in South Africa, only in a particular region, only the particular population, and also saying why that's the case, right? And then the concepts that you're drawing from, how relevant are they? How useful are they? How are they assisting you to engage, to make your arguments in the work that you're doing? Conceiving of the idea, conceptualizing the idea. Now the call is there. You're doing work, or you've had these questions, but now you need to move from these questions or from the curiosity to actually conceptualizing a research project that someone can be willing to give 10 million to, right? So here again, the importance of thinking and rethinking. Don't be in a rush. And that's why it's important for you to do work on time. Give yourself enough time. Theorize, make decisions around the approaches that you're going to work on. And if you're going to be working on a collaborative project, the thinking needs to be collaborative. You need to work with your collaborators on putting together this work, because these are the people that you're going to spend in the next 3-5 years working on the project with. And if they were not there at the beginning, conceptual phase, then you are bound to hit disagreements and challenges along the way. Not that that's not going to happen anyway, but it might be more complicated if your collaborators or team members were not there at the conceptualization phase. Okay, so what is the research problem? How are we going to approach this? What does literature say? Read, share ideas. What are you drawing from literature? The theoretical construction, developing what theory. So what is it that you're already contemplating and theorizing based on this that you will then prove with your research and take forward? And based on all this background, what do you then hypothesize, right? And as I said, anecdotal observation, you've observed that, there's all these videos and things that people share on TikTok or on these Facebook or whatever platform, and anecdotal things, observations that people say, that people feel, that people think. And what does that mean, right? Because sometimes those can be very dangerous, because some people take that as the truth. So what is it that you can contribute, therefore, as a scholar, to actually contribute towards ensuring that the information that goes out there is information that is empirically sound, right? Come up with questions, workshop the questions. Why, how the phenomenon originated. I think we're still asking ourselves, especially around COVID-19, right? So it's an ongoing conversation. Causal explanation of the phenomenon. We've heard many conspiracy theories or many plausible causes around what it is that happened, right? Is there an agreement in terms of the genesis of COVID? I'm not sure, right? The research problem. So all these different steps in how you then articulate and think about the problem that you have identified, and then the methods that you can use to be able to solve this problem, right? And if you're still uncertain, if you are unsure, you go back. Part of the proposal, even for a grant writing, is the literature is very important. It's very, very important, because it ensures that you're not reinventing the wheel, like I said. You are aware of what's already out there. You've identified the gaps. You have identified ways in which you want to contribute to what already exists, the conversation, right? And then it also just shows you and demonstrates your knowledge of the research problem also. It assists you in the articulation of the problem and how you also structure it as well. Theoretically as well, it assists, demonstrates your understanding of the theoretical and research issues related to your research question. What is it that other researchers are drawing on theoretically, conceptually, in how they are tending to this issue, right? And when you do literature review, it's also the opportunity to really be in conversation, as if you're in conversation with someone sitting with you in a room, but to do so critically, and you're evaluating this. And this is why you should not just have bulks and bulks and bulks and bulks of direct quotation, direct quotation, direct quotation. It's about providing an understanding of what you've read, because it's only if you've got this understanding that you can be able to say, okay, based on this is what I think should be done. But if you cannot critically evaluate the literature, then what informs your research problem, right? Literature review assists you to synthesize, to integrate the existing literature into what you want to do, what you plan to do, and theoretical insights, and looking at what's there, what is new that is possible. And when I read your work as the reader or as a reviewer, I also then see how your work has got the potential to make a contribution to offer insights because you've already identified or shown what others have said, what others have done, and you're showing how your work then speaks to that and intends to contribute alongside that which already exists. Okay? Older, current literature, striking a balance, trying not to focus more on dated literature, again, trying to be intentional in how you choose your literature, right? Yes, this is a paper that was published in 1974, but it actually speaks directly to the research problem that I have, right? It speaks to the methodology that I want to use. So there's so much about this author, about this research that actually resonates with how I'm imagining, I'm planning my work, right? And this is the person that I want to be in conversation with for these reasons, right? So you show different arguments, approaches, theories. So much of the research has been qua, or much of the research has been quant. So I want to come in to bring people's voices, right? The theories that have been used are these kinds of theories. I want to bring in a different theory that assists us to look at these different layers of doing this work, right? So these are some of the gaps that you can only identify if you engage with literature. When you're doing a literature review, what are the issues that you want to pay attention to, right? The review questions. You develop a data search strategy. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sources online. So you need to develop a strategy to say, what are my keywords? What are the key points? What is my focal point area? So if these are some of the things that you can answer for yourself, they also assist you to be able to get somewhat of a clear data search strategy, right? As I've said, the keywords, what is it that you're going to include, exclude, why, right? And then identify the literature that you want to include, and then engage with that. What are the debates that remain hanging, right? What are some of the questions that remain unanswered that your study intends to give attention to? And then the methods quickly. Again, how are you going to tackle this problem? What is your hypothesis? What is your research question? What are your objectives? How are they informing then and guiding you in terms of the method that you're going to be using, either qual or quant? Okay, I'm skipping through this because, as I said, these are things that we've attended to before, but they're critical here as well, because even when you apply for grant money, it's important to have a clear, well thought out, researched plan. So it's not just a proposal, but it's actually a research proposal or a research plan, but with a particular focus on applying for a grant, right? In your methodology, it's about your participants. We know this, the methods, the technology that you're going to use, the protocol, the interview guide, decisions that you need to make for all those different aspects. And then, as we know, for quantitative studies, these are some of the things that you think about for a lab experiment. What kind of design, who are going to be your subjects, don't like that word, participants, the instruments that you're going to use, the procedures that you're going to follow. I'm just flying through this. And then the results and discussion as well, what you intend to, of course, with your results, you won't have that data yet because this is still a proposal. So there are no results at the proposal stage, we know this, right? But planning should focus on the kind of data to be collected and what statistical procedures will be used in order to answer a research question or test the hypothesis. So this is now you're anticipating that for your results, this is what you're going to be using or drawing from as part of your analysis to be able to get to your results or make meaning of the results that you would have gotten. The impact of your work, the merits of your work, discussion, what are some of the issues that you're hoping to highlight as a result of this research. Okay, some common mistakes. You don't contextualize your work. You don't accurately present the theoretical and empirical contribution. It's not clear what this work is about, what it's going to do, and how it's going to do it. It's not focused, right? You have your research question at the beginning, but as you go along, you've forgotten about your research question. You are going in a different direction now. So there isn't that golden thread that I spoke about earlier is not there. There's no coherent argument for why this work is important, is necessary. And then technical oversight as well is something that we need to think about that is also very important. You don't want to lose out on money because of formatting, stylistic issues, grammatical issues, technical things generally that can be avoided if you take your time and you properly plan your work and you plan your proposal very well. Your work plan is clear. That way, you increase your chances also of being able to get funding. Okay, and this is where I'm going to stop for today and show myself and hope that you have a question or two that we can have a conversation about. Okay. All right, so let's see. Hi, Stephen. Submission of the proposal. What if I was planning to submit, then unplanned load shedding affect my submission? Will the funders allow me to submit later and provide some motivation for the late submission? Yeah, Stephen. No. That is why it's important to do the work timelessly and not wait for the last minute. If you submit your proposal on the 26th of September at 6 p.m. and that is the due date, the last date, and the cutoff time is 6 p.m. and you work on your proposal and you submit it at 5 to 6 or at 5 o'clock and then unplanned load shedding happens, then unfortunately that's on you. The funders will not allow for that. I know we can say in South Africa, this is a challenge that we have, but it's a challenge that we are aware of, that we need to plan around, because we know that even though there is planned load shedding, sometimes substations just have a problem. It's a recurring issue, so it means it's something that is likely to happen at any given moment. So if the due date is the 26th of September, do not wait for the 26th of September. Work on your proposal, do everything, make sure that you give yourself a couple of days to submit, so that when you submit on the 22nd of September, an unplanned load shedding happens, then you can still breathe, because you know that you still have 4 days to submit. If that happens, you're like, okay, I'll try tomorrow. Then you can do so tomorrow. Sometimes the outage happens for 2 or 3 days. You can go to a different area, go to the office, go to an internet cafe, go anywhere where they've got generators, and then submit from there. So doing things on time affords you the luxury to not panic and not have to ask for extension from funders because of challenges that are beyond your control, but that unfortunately that you can plan for. So my answer to you is that make sure that you submit your proposal on time. Make sure that you give yourself at least a couple of days to submit, because that's the beauty with these things, that you can submit anytime, right? You can submit anytime. As soon as your proposal is ready, submit it. Okay. So yeah, unfortunately for that one, no, funders will not understand, and they will not give you grace period. Okay. Hello, Fratel. Indeed. First and foremost, a master's degree is a project on its own. That is correct. Secondly, a PhD is a project on its own. Also correct. Therefore, embarking on a research project while doing master's or a PhD is being overambitious to the extreme. This is my personal opinion. What is your take on this issue? What have you seen in the field or in academia? As a professor, have you seen students beating two birds, master's and or PhD in a research project with one stone? I think the challenge is because you're separating them, right? A grant does not necessarily have to be something totally different from your master's or your PhD, right? A research proposal for funding can be based on the work that you're already doing for your master's or your PhD. And while we may call that maybe a bursary or a scholarship, I think when we say a grant, we're being all-encompassing, right? So you can actually get a grant that can assist you to complete your studies and then even maybe beyond your studies as well. I think for you as students, yes, I agree that it's a lot of work already focusing on your master's and your PhD, and doing two huge projects might mean delaying the completion of your study. And that's why many funders say, if you are a graduate student, the application needs to be done by your supervisor, right? So it can actually, you can be part of a bigger project belonging to your supervisor. But if you apply with your supervisor, then your name can also go in as a team member. I mean, it sucks. And the challenge there is that you won't be the PI. Your supervisor will then be the PI. I've seen a number of a number of grants, a number of funding opportunities that are there. I know, for example, the NIHSS, the National Institute for the Social and Human Sciences, Humanities, does offer funding beyond just your studies. So huge funding. But they indicate that should you be a PhD student, you need to apply with your supervisor. I think this is based on the understanding from funders that, as you say, Fertel, that graduate students are busy with their own projects as well. However, if there is a grant opportunity, and like I said, remember we spoke about how the call is linked to particular themes or particular focus areas. And you might see a call, funding call, that might be linked or aligned to the work that you're already doing for your PhD. And you also need to think of your work beyond the PhD as well. And in that instance, with the NIHSS, for example, they're saying here, there's 500,000 available for a project focusing on, I don't know, land and sustainability, and maybe your research is focused on that. And they say, if you're a PhD student interested in this field, wanting to apply, you need to apply with your supervisor, so that the supervisor can be the one that carries more of the burden, having to write the reports and submitting things and dealing with all the admin and technical things. And then you are a team member, so you are benefiting from that project. So when it comes to the application and the budgeting, you're working alongside your supervisor, and then you can also have a say in terms of the budget items. Also thinking about your needs in terms of research and what you require. That actually that grant can also double up as somewhat of a scholarship for you. So for all the work that you're going to be doing, but now you're thinking beyond or over and above your PhD, but then you benefit financially and you also get the opportunity to even attend a conference, either locally or in a different country. So that also gets budgeted for. Then you can even go and present your work in progress and get feedback. So it can be possible in that way, right? Most of them, it's not directly that you can apply for funding for R1,000,000 as a master's or PhD student, because it's understood that you're still an emerging researcher, busy and preoccupied with your own studies. And that's why they always pay you up with your supervisor, right? And then when you finish your studies, and it's something that you can also even put on your CV as well, because you are a grant holder. It's your supervisor applying as the PI, but you're a team member, you're a collaborator in that research. And that's something that you can put on your CV. It's something that you will have in the back as well. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Hello, Jumeleng. There's always an inception report required. Inception report. Are you talking about the... I'm not sure I understand. I've never come across a grant application that requires that. Would you care to elaborate what you mean by that? Because I'm aware of the reports that they either a letter of intent or motivation at the beginning, and then an initial report maybe 3 or 6 months into the project. Because now I'm going to use my understanding of inception as a literal understanding of at the inception of the project. And I personally have not come across that. So I will not be able to answer you that at the moment. But I can find out for you. I can find out for you and then come back with an answer for you tomorrow, because we have another session tomorrow. Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions. And just as you're thinking, a quick reminder, as I also indicated last week, that we will not be having the session on the 28th of September, on Thursday, which was going to be a blast session that was also going to be focusing on grant writing, but focusing specifically on the issues or questions that you might be having related to all the sessions that we would have had focusing on grant writing. I noted that a reminder was sent for these sessions again, and the 28th was included there. So please note that there will not be a session on Thursday. So the sessions that we're going to have is this one today and the session tomorrow. So all the questions that you have or might have, we can answer them now. And if there are no more questions, or you might have questions later on, you'll have the opportunity to ask tomorrow. Okay, look out for the email as well, from the email address that you know linked to these sessions, that will also again remind you about the session on Thursday, that it will not be happening. Okay, we would not want you to show up and then find that there's no session and then feel like your time has been wasted. So please note that on the 28th, there will not be a session. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Okay. All right, Itumeleng, I'll do that for you. Okay. Is it possible for PhD students in 2023 academic year to get research funding? Anonymous, you can apply for funding for 2024. At the moment, it's obviously way too late to get funding for 2023, whether internal or external funding, all of those would be closed by now. So for the academic year 2023, it's already October now almost, so that will not be possible. However, you can apply, there will be a call internally. I would encourage you to also look for other external funding opportunities. If you are a local South African student, there's also the NRF, and depending on which field you are in, if you are in the social sciences and humanities, there's the NHSS that I mentioned earlier. And of course, there's many other funding opportunities that are not necessarily South Africa based. So opening up to all the other students. But there's also the UNISA bursary, open for all UNISA students from across the globe. So I would encourage you to start looking out for calls for funding for 2024. But for academic year 2023, I think others will also tell you they've already received their money for 2023 a long time ago already. Okay, so Mpho, testing an instrument. So you're doing qualitative research and you want to know how to test your interview schedule to check whether your questions are okay or not. For your interviews and your focus groups, and you're asking whether you need an ethical clearance for that. You do, and you can do so. Testing it could be the pilot study. So what we call pilot study, you can start with a pilot study and say, okay, I intend to interview 20 people, but I'm going to start by interviewing 3 people, and those interviews will not be included as part of the actual study. Maybe the 20 does not include the 3, so the 3 will be the pilot study, so that you can see whether the questions that you're asking are understood the way that you're hoping that they will be understood by your participants. So you do a pilot study for that. Okay. And for your pilot study, you do include that in your ethical clearance, and you do that at the beginning, and then build up from there. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So that's how you test it. Okay. Officially, you can put together an instrument. But also you need to, so you cannot just test it with your friends or just people that you know, because remember, you're doing this deliberately for research purpose. So you need to also test it on the same population group that you're going to be doing your research on. Okay, so that you can see whether it is doing what you want it to do for the purpose that you want it for. Okay. There was a question, can I still apply for funding even though I am already in the, you're already in the what? Your sentence is not complete, Anonymous. So if you can just complete that. Hello, Mafuko. Who evaluates the grants proposals before submission? If you are applying for your grant, you're applying as an individual. So the best person to assist you would be your supervisor. So if it's the kind of grant where your supervisor has to be the one that applies on your behalf, then that goes without saying. But then you might identify a grant that does not require your supervisor to be your co-researcher. So in that case, you may request your supervisor to assist you by reading and evaluating your grant proposal for you and assisting you to make sure that everything is in order. But there isn't a requirement for the initial evaluation. It's something good to do for someone to have a look at for you. But otherwise, it's the funder themselves after you've submitted, of course, but you're interested in before you submit. At the moment, the person who can be able to assist you with this is your supervisor. If you have a mentor, then by all means also give to a mentor to have a look at. So this is an informal process. So there isn't a formal process or procedure to follow for the evaluating of a grant proposal before you submit it. Okay. Okay, Anonymous, may you please elaborate on the process of engaging a supervisor at master's level? I don't understand your question. Engaging a supervisor, how? For what? Please elaborate for me. Then hopefully I can be able to answer you. The process of engaging a supervisor at master's level. Please elaborate, Anonymous. Okay. Okay. Here's another question. You want to know who will be the owner of the work between the university that is providing M&D bursaries and the grant funder. Okay, today you're really asking me confusing questions. Okay, in terms of the work that you're doing at the university, in terms of the M&D bursary is alongside you being registered as a UNISA student. So when you get the M&D bursary, you get it because you're a UNISA student, because you're registered with UNISA. So all the other procedures and rules and regulations would apply. And here I'm going to direct you to the M&D procedures in terms of copyright and owning of information. And you're asking, so I'm assuming that you're saying if you have a UNISA bursary and also an external grant funders do not own your work. Funders offer you financial assistance for you to be able to do the research, okay? So I can get, or I've gotten funding from a number of external funders, and the work continues to be my work. So what the funders, what they do is they provide you an enabling space for you to be able to do your work. The benefit that they get is that through their financial support, you manage to do work that is of relevance, that speaks to social imperatives, that speaks to the SDGs. It's something that is good for them. So what they require from you is acknowledgement. So you do your master's, your PhD, and you're done. And at the end there, with the acknowledgements where you thank mommy and daddy and your friends, you also thank the funder. So that's the only acknowledgement. Beyond that, they do not own your work. You own your work. They don't own the work. Okay, so them funding you does not equate to it, or it does not lead to them owning your work in any way. Funders do not own your work at all. They just get acknowledgement when you publish a paper based on the research work that you did that emanates from the research that you conducted, then you acknowledge them. So like right now, you're doing your PhD, and then at the end, under the acknowledgement, you say, I would like to thank the NRF for financial support. And if you publish a paper, or when you publish a paper, those two papers that are going to come from your PhD, in those papers as well, you're going to indicate, I would like to acknowledge and thank the NRF for financial assistance towards the research work that this paper emanates from, right? That's all. The owner of the work is not the funder at all, right? The only time where the funder will own the work is if maybe the work was commissioned. So they paid you to do the research, which is different from them giving you money that enables you to do research as a scholar, as an academic. But if they come to you and they say, we'd like you to do this research for us. So they come with the research topic, how they want you to do it, what they are hoping to understand or to garner from that work. And they say, we'll give you 100,000 rand. We need you to spend 6 months doing this research, and then you write a report that's going to assist us for whatever it is that we're doing. That's commissioned work. For that, when you're done with the work, you hand it to them, they own it. You can come up with, to some degree, you can come up with an agreement with them to say, okay, I'm going to write you a report and do all of these things, and this forms part of the initial contract. You don't want to do that at the end. The initial contract says, I'm going to do all of that, but because I'm a scholar, I would also like to publish from this work. Is this acceptable to you? Then from there, you would have gotten your 100K for doing the work for them, but also you use the data to publish something that you can then use at the university as well. Okay, but if they give you funding to do research as an academic, as a scholar, then they don't own the work. Okay. Oh, okay. Can I still apply for funding even though I'm already in the literature review write-up phase? Yes, of course. Of course. It's just like when you're applying for a bursary right now. You apply for a bursary in 2024. If you are in the literature review, then the idea, the hope is that next year you're going to be collecting your data. So maybe for you to collect your data, to travel, to buy, to all your research instruments that are necessary, you need funding for that. You most definitely can. You most definitely can. You can apply for funding, even though you are in chapter 2 or chapter 3 or wherever you are in the process, as long as it's clear what the money is going to be used for. So if you've already collected your data, you've analyzed, you've done all of that, you need to explain what you need the money for then, if you've already done that, right? So again, it's important to be able to say, these are the activities that I need the money for. As long as you can do that, you should be able to apply for funding. Okay. Is there a specific format for grant writing? I'm asking because the first grant application that I applied for provided a format that needs to be followed, including format for CV presentation. Different funders, different formats. Some funders just indicate what needs to be included. So they'll say, we want to know what problem you want to attend to, how you're going to attend to it, and what's your budget, and then how you're going to disseminate the results. And then you take that and then you structure it the way that you want. And because you know what a proposal needs to look like, you will structure it so that it's logically placed so that it makes sense to the person who's going to be looking at it and reading it. Some funders are very particular. The application is online and it's very specific in terms of what needs to come first. Like I said, they will say, okay, tell us the rationale for wanting to do this work. 500, not more than 500 words. Literature that informs this work, not more than so many words. The methods or the process, how you're going to do this, so many. And then give us your personal profile, right? And that could be, or your brief bio narrative. And then you provide that as well. And they say maybe not more than 1,000 words. Indicate your recent publications, if any. So it depends on the funder. So the answer is yes, some funders do have a specific format. It makes things easier for them. And it's also linked to what we spoke about last week in terms of the ranking and the criteria also that they then provide to the reviewer to say, as you review this, we want to see if this is scientifically sound. Are the methods clearly articulated? Is this study feasible? So all of that. So they would have a specific format because they wanted to be clear for the reviewer as well. What is it that they need to look at? Some fundings do have a format. Some funding applications do not. Okay. All right. Okay, I think that's it. Those are all the questions. If I didn't get to answer your question, I'm trying to check if I missed anything. Doesn't look like it. All right. So I shall see you all tomorrow again for the final session on grant writing. Okay. And tomorrow we're going to be talking about money. So come again with all your questions, either linked to today, last week's session, and also, of course, tomorrow's session. And Itumeleng, I'm going to try and find the answer for you. So I hope you'll be in tomorrow's session, then I can provide that answer for you. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy your afternoon, your evening, wherever you are in the world. Goodbye. See you tomorrow.